Alrighty, good afternoon, everybody. Happy Monday today, and welcome to this week's online class. All right, so I'll be going over those details in a second. Nice to see some of you online with me this afternoon. It's a sunny day, but not a warm day. And you also should have received an email from me this morning as a inspiration. As just this morning, I did another interview over Zoom with a former student, a female student who works for IQ Metrics in Regina, and she has some inspiring words for you guys on why to study computer science and stuff like that. So anywho, the agenda for today, I'm going to now start sharing my screen. The agenda for today, from our website, from our Computer Science 20S page, from down the list now to here under week 13, that's where we are, the 13th week here. This week, I want to go over part 2 of the looping unit. So that would be looping problem 3 and looping problem 4, including also how they're done using the alternative assignments. This will essentially complete all the assignments of the Computer Science 20S course. So next week, it's going to get a little more interesting as I'm going to go over the first example of the Programming Extras unit. So those are some cool things to help prepare for a final project. And we'll talk about what a final project can be in this strange time and some of the adaptations that some of you may want to do, or just the general project that you might be interested in creating to finish up this course. Any amount of online engaged learning is good for me, but since we're going to look at this, in terms of resources for this, I'll be drawing on stuff from our folder of stuff from the Looping Part 2 presentation. Once you get to this GitHub page, you have access to all the code from this example. This is also something that you guys could know for the future, that other examples are here too. If you had to go back all the way to like variables example 1, you could find it right here, open it up, and you could find all the code. You can actually download the entire project, including all the design and everything else. But this is a quick and easy way to get at the code for one of the examples if you need it, okay? So anyways, yeah, I went to looping example2.cs, and if I click on it, and this is just right on the internet, right on this web page, I can now get at this code and I can select it and copy and paste it into my project as needed. Okay, because if we look at the problem description for this problem, that's going to be very helpful, is to grab that code. In a lot of ways, it's going to make a bunch of circles on the screen, very much like that example did. So actually, let's start with that. I'm going to go right to the code, okay? And it's going to make, actually, I'm going to go back to the design. It's going to make a bunch of circles in essentially a rectangle pattern. So I'm going to go in and code the button that allows you to create a rectangle pattern on the screen. And what I'm going to do is go back to that example. I'm going to go to GitHub, and I'm going to grab that code from that example, okay? So you can see here, when I click run, it does a bunch of stuff here. It's all commented it in. So it's going to show this dialog. It's going to do a bunch of stuff here. Now this isn't quite right, but it's a good starting place. Grab some of that code between the opening bracket of run, which is on line 65, and down here, the closing bracket on line 108. And you got to be careful. You got to make sure you don't grab an extra bracket. And I'm going to copy that, leave a little space, and paste it into my rectangle button. Okay. I'm going to strip away some of the comments. That's good in the example, but just to show you just how much code there actually is, I'm going to get rid of some of these comments. Now, this code will need to be changed, because it's from the example, it's not quite right, but it's a good start. Okay, so let's just do this. Okay. There's the code without the comments. Okay, Now, it looks like there's some other things I'm going to need, like height and width and spacer. So if I go back to that example, these are obviously things like global variables that I'm going to need. Okay, grab those global variables, go back over here, go to the section where global variables go, paste them in. Okay, now you could also see me type all this in if you want, but this is just speeding up our timeline here. So there's the spacer variable, there's the width and the height, and now I have an issue on this line right here. The size of the circle in the example uses a up-down thing, but in this thing it uses this text box right here, this thing, which I believe I've named txt size. Yes. So I'm going to modify my code so that this comes from txt size. However, if I do this dot text, that's not going to work because I can't put text directly into an integer. I'm going to have to convert it to an integer. And normally we do this in 2 lines of code. We make a string variable and then do it, but I'm going to do it all in 1 line of code. I'm going to take the text out of the text box and convert it to an integer. And there we go. Okay, the next thing that's missing is a thing to change the color dialog. And I now realize I actually forgot to put that on here. Because in this problem, the user is allowed to choose a color using this dialog chooser, or just use random colors. So I'm going to need to add one more thing for my toolbox, and that's the color dialog chooser. Okay, and here it is, color dialog. I can put it anywhere on my design because it actually just appears down here. And since I don't want to change the code, I'm going to name it the same as I named it here. So I'm going to go into the properties and name it that. Exact same name, CDB color, for color dialog box color. And then all my code that I took straight from the example is exactly the same. And now I could actually try it and see what happens. So I'm going to run it. Now it will run essentially like the example that we did in class, for the most part. It's not quite right. Okay. And put a size in, 50, rectangle pattern. Color. Okay, so it's not quite right. It's drawing just a big black square. And that's actually the reason for that is if you look back on the example, there was a little more code that was put in form load to change the background color and things like that. So I'm going to also take the code from form load, and I could put it back in form load, but instead I'm just going to put it right inside this rectangle button as well. So there's all that code. Okay. Some of it isn't needed. I don't need these lines of code to position buttons and things like that. I don't need that. So really, all I need is the first couple lines here. I need to get the color and set it. I don't need this. I don't need to have it maximized. I don't need that code. So really, I only need 3 lines of code. Set the background color, set the width and the height from the form. Now, I've named my form something different in this program. I've named my form, did I bother? No, I did. FRM looping 3. So that's the name I gave my form, and so that's the name I'm going to need to put there. Okay, so now let's try this again. So 3 more lines I got from form load. Again, I haven't really typed a line here. I've just been taking lines out of the example. Picking a color. Okay, there it's drawing a bunch of tiles, exactly the way I kind of wanted it to. So it's very similar to the way it worked here. Okay, except I'm going to make a couple minor changes. In the and you don't actually need to do this for your project, but in this, sorry, let's check something. Something happened on Teams here. Go. In this, I used a white background, and in the example, I used a black background. That's fine. You don't need to change that, but I'm going to. All I'm going to do is change this to a white background for my thing here. And then when I eventually draw the line around the outside of the circle, I'm going to make it a black line. So just a slight change to the code in those two spots. And again, I'll go back slowly over this code in a second, but pick a color, and there we go. Whoops. Okay, try it one more time. Okay, 50 rectangle. There we go. So now it's drawing the rectangles into a tile. So half of this program is done, except now I need to add some stuff in here for the choices the user gets. So they don't always just get to pick the color. They're going to have to choose between two options. So I'm going to add two more global variables now. And now would be a chance, if you were following this video after the fact, you can now see in slower motion here that when I go and build this problem, I'm going to start with a global variable, a constant spacer 1, a width equals 0, a height equals 0, a constant string for, let's say, option 1 equals, and I'm going to put the words rectangle. No, sorry. The user gets two choices. They get to choose their colors, or Java, there we go, string option 2 would be that they have random colors. So those will be the two options that the user gets. They get to choose which color for their tiles, or they can just have random colors for their tiles. Now I'm going to go to the form load code by double-clicking the form. When the form loads, I'm going to change what appears in this dialog, or this combo box called CBO color. So combo box color dot items dot add, and I'm going to add option 1, and then I'm going to add option 2. So I'm going to add those two strings into the combo box. Let me see how that looks now. So when I run this, those two options are now sitting in the combo box. If I want one there right from the start, which I'm going to do as well, I'm also going to take CBO color, and I'm going to change the text inside that to be, and I'll make it option 1. So that way when it first runs, not only are they both in the drop-down, but right at the very beginning, there's one sitting right in there, right at the start. So I don't have to necessarily click on it to choose it. Give the two choices, choose colors or random colors, but one of them is sitting in there at the start. Speaking of sitting in there at the start, I'm also going to do that for the text box. Just so that the user doesn't accidentally leave it sitting empty, I'm going to give 10 as a default option, so that way I don't have to necessarily forget to type a number in there. It's in there. They can change it if they want. But that way they can click a button and get started building tiles right away if they want to. Okay. Now, you might have wondered, why did I bother putting these into global variables and constants for this? This will come up later, because now, as we go and build a button, whether it's a rectangle or a triangle, we need to know which of these two options they chose. Did they choose option 1 or did they choose option 2? And since we'll be using an if statement, we want to make sure we spell this exactly the same way. So rather than worrying about typing it exactly the same, I can use my global variable. So now I can say if, okay, but in order to do this, I need to pull their choice out of this combo box. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to get the user's choice from the combo box. Okay. Oh my goodness, kids. Can't type today. So, string choice equals combo box color dot text. There, I have their choice. If their choice equals option 1, which is where they get to choose a color, right? Then all the code I just wrote, all this code down here, would be correct. So I'm going to not close that bracket there, but I'm going to go down to the bottom of all this code and close it right there. So all that code between after that if statement, okay? Here's where I make it decide which colors. So if they chose option 1, which is that they choose a color, then this code would apply. And now I'm going to go through and actually comment these lines, okay, just so you can see what each of these lines does. Okay, this line shows the dialog box. Dialog box to pick a color. Okay, so this thing here is what makes that. Let me just run it again. Yeah, I realize looping problem 3 is a complicated problem, but it's what makes this dialog box appear. You don't have to make this dialog box. Like a message box, this is something that can be added in C# as a design option, and it's really handy. And again, if those of you might be thinking of something like this for a project, this is really handy where you can choose specific colors, and then it will use that color in whatever thing you're choosing it for. Okay? All right. This next line, what does it do? It creates a, put this in quotes, color object to use. Okay? Now, this is something fancy. This isn't an integer. This isn't a double. This is what's called a color, which is a little more complicated. In the notes for this unit and in the video for this unit, I do cover this. I cover the details behind a color object and how it's a little more complicated than other things. It jumps ahead quite a bit, right? Like you can sort of see here. It talks about creating these fancy objects and what's going on there with that. But for the most part, this is just code you can mimic. Okay? All right, the next line. What does this line do? It creates a surface to draw on. We're going to be drawing a bunch of circles. And this is a fancy way that it can create graphics to draw on a surface, which is the form itself. Okay, this line, what does it do? It clears the surface. It's like wiping the board. You wipe off a board to draw something again. That's what that line does. And it clears it so that it's white. Okay? In the example, it cleared it so it was black. And that's fine. You can have it either way. Okay? What does this line do? It creates a, and I'll put it in quotes, a pen. And what the pen does is it draws the outside line. We're going to be drawing circles. There's two parts to it. The line around the outside is what's called the pen, and the brush draws, or I'll put it in better terms, it fills it in with color. So the color it uses, you'll notice, is the same color we had up here, the one that we chose from the dialog box. So the dialog box chooses a color, and then later that color is used inside the brush to fill it in. Okay? This is the size to make the circles. And by size, I mean when you're talking about circles, you could be thinking in terms of radius and circumference, but the size really means the box that it draws the circle inside of. Okay? This is the space between circles. What that does. Okay? These are the most circles it can draw, both up and down. So I'm using a X and Y sort of naming scheme here. Y would be up, down, X is left to right, where it calculates, which I think I'll put in here, the most circles it can draw. Okay? And then finally, okay, it uses two loops, which one is nested inside the other, to draw circles. Okay? So the first loop, and this is the new code, a for loop, goes from the beginning to the maximum number going down, and then the next loop goes from the beginning to the maximum number going across. And then it draws, inside the loops, it draws a circle. It draws one circle inside the loop, going down, going down, going down. Now that is if they chose option 1. All of that code, which I've now commented, works. Okay? So part of this program now says if they chose they choose their color, it will draw those circles. Okay, don't worry about that it cuts off. That's not something I need you to worry about. Okay. Now, if I go all the way down, now would come the else. Okay. Else if what their choice was option 2, which means random colors. Okay, oops, double equal sign. So if they choose option 2, the random color option, okay, now a lot of this code will be the same, but some parts will change. So rather than reinvent the wheel, I'm going to start by selecting all the code after that first if statement, all the way to the bottom of those loops, copying it, pasting it, and now I'll go back to the first line. Okay, so the color that they're going to choose is not coming from a dialog box. So I'm going to get rid of that. Okay? The color object to use is not going to be made from the dialog box. So instead, I'm just going to say that. It's just a color at this point. I'm not going to make it anything fancy at this point. Still going to have a surface to draw on. Still going to clear the surface. Still going to create a pen. But I can't make the brush yet. The brush can't be built yet because there's no color yet. So what I'm going to do is take this line, and rather than delete it, I'm going to cut it, because that way I don't have to retype it. I'm going to paste it inside the two for loops before I build the circle. So I'm going to put it down there for now. So brush is made down here. Okay, I know it's still an error, but I'll come back to it in a second. Okay, so here's after the else option 2. Create a color. It's just nothing at this point. As a matter of fact, what we can do is we can get rid of that line altogether. We'll make the color further on down. We'll make it down in here. So let's just get rid of that line. Create a surface to draw on, clear the surface, create a pen, create a size, that's still the same, create the space, calculate the circles, use the two for loops. Okay, so really, we deleted some of those first lines, and now we're going to add some lines down here. The lines now are going to come from another hint on the sheet right in here where we created this, okay, to do randomness. So we're going to make something random for this to work. So I'm going to go back and actually add that as a global variable. I'm going to make random equals new random. That way I can make random numbers when I need to. I make this thing to generate random numbers. It's another one of our global variables. Width, height, we have a few of them up here. Okay, so now I go back down here. an integer for the amount of red that I'm going to make in this random color equals random dot next. And in the hints, I actually use constants for this. But I'm just going to put the numbers in. It's a random number between 0, no red, and 256. And I'm going to go one more, 257. That's the random amount of red I can generate. I'm then going to do the exact same thing with green and blue. These are just integers at this point. They're just numbers representing how much red, how much green, and how much blue can I use to generate this color. And again, you can see this kind of in the hints right here. Now I can generate a color, which I'm going to do. Okay, so let's back up a little bit, put a comment in here. Random numbers for the color. Okay, and now I create a color. Numbers. So color equals, instead of saying new color, I say color again with a capital C, dot from ARGB, bracket, red, comma, green, comma, blue. That's what RGB means. It means red, green, and blue. So now this is a random color from those random numbers. Then the rest of the code fits. It creates the brush. It will use the brush to fill it in. Let's see if it works. Ooh, boy, this is taking longer than I thought today, but here we go. A random color, size 10, rectangle pattern, and it looks like it's about to crash.
Good exception for me again.
I think maybe I went one too big here. That's the problem. I think it's 256 colors, not 257.
I think it's 255.
Yeah, it is, but you always go one more, right? So 255 is the max, and so 256. That's my fault. I had 256 in the brain when it's actually 255. Let me just confirm that before I say any more out of my you-know-what. Let's make that a little bit bigger. And random colors. And there we go. Random colors are being generated. Okay, so that's done. Okay, all of that code is now there. It's got a lot of comments in it, but all of that code for the rectangle button now works. So we have, slowly scroll you through this because the triangle button is super easy. Okay, so we have these global variables right here. Okay, if you're watching this later on the video, you can pause it. And then here's the rectangle button, same thing. There's a bunch of code at the start. And then an if statement that starts with option 1. And I'll just back up a little bit. Goes through these lines right here. Okay, doing a bunch of things. And then it goes through 2 loops right here to draw the circle. The if statement closes, and then an else if opens. And then it similarly has a bunch of code here. Some of it is the same, some of it I removed some of it. And then it has 2 loops that it goes through, where some of that new code is added in to do the random numbers and stuff. Okay, now to do the triangle button, I'm going to take all the code from the rectangle button. So all the ifs and else ifs, all that code, pop it into the triangle button. Okay, and in reality, there's only one little change to make. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of the comments to tighten up the code. But it's the same basic code you can see here in triangle. Nothing changes, okay, until we get to the loops. So all the code is the same. Okay, keep going here. You can see here, this problem is a big change from where this course started. Okay, so we get to the loops. And same with option 2. I'm going to just, for now, get rid of all the comments so you can see the code uncommented. Looking at the time here as I'm doing this, it might be that I will do looping problem 4 next week. I'll probably slip that into next week. But okay, so there's the triangle button. All the code, same code. The only thing I did was took the comments out. And the only change you make, and you have to make it in both loops, in both the if and the else if. And you can see this is actually said in the hint here. For triangles, in the second inner for loop, it should be changed from x equals max x to x is less than or equal to y. So what you've got to do is in the second for loop, the one inside, where it says right here what the loop stops at, you just change that to a y. And then you go back down to the next loop and do the same thing. And believe it or not, that's all the geometry you need to do to change a rectangle into a triangle. And now let's demonstrate that. Random colors, triangle. And there you go. Okay? Not sure why it's clearing out there. And rectangle. And that's it. That completes looping problem number 3. Probably the biggest code of any programming problem in the whole course, other than maybe some of the case studies. But this is quite a bit of code to get this problem solved. Luckily, it's not code you had to write all yourself. Instead, really, you could copy and paste a lot of this code from the example itself. Now, there's also other ways you can optimize this code. I'm not going to get into all of that. I know some of you who've tried this have done that, and that's great. There are definitely more hints on this that you can look into if you'd like to. I wanted to make sure I was able to show you guys how to get it done. Now, the adaptation for this, for those of you doing the adapted assignment, because you can't use Visual Studio, is to go to that .fiddle site. And the way I describe the problem, it's got a similar structure, is you ask the user if they want to enter a rectangle or a triangle. Let me just zip down to the looping problem. Come on, Internet. Come on, Internet. Okay, so right here, you ask them, do you want to draw a rectangle or do you want to draw a triangle? And then they just enter the size. So let's do that. Let's ask the user, enter a R for a rectangle or a T for a triangle. Okay. And now what I need to do is I'm going to read in that line and just store it as a string variable, which choice. Choice equals read line. Let me zoom. So I'm going to ask the user, right, R or T, and I'm going to store that. Okay. So if choice R for rectangle. Okay, I'm going to do something with that. And if it's triangle, I'm going to do something with that. But I'm also going to ask the user to enter the size for this thing. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to have them enter the size of the shape they want to make. So I'm going to make a size variable by converting to an integer console dot read line. So I'm doing this all in one line of code as well. So I'm reading in the number or the size and converting it into an integer. Okay. So then what I'm going to do, let me go back to see the way it's described, is I just draw that many sort of stars on the screen. So if I said 8, I draw an 8 by 8 rectangle of that. Let's do that. Once again, I'm going to run a for loop for int. So I'm going to start by going down. So I'm going to use y. Or actually, you know what I'll use? I'll use rows equals 0. Well, rows is less than the size. Rows equals rows plus 1. And that's more easily done as plus plus. That's just a little shorthand for rows equals rows plus 1. So if I said 10 rows for my size, it's going to go through 10 rows. And inside of this, another for loop. Columns equals 0. Well, columns is less than size. Columns plus plus. Okay, so it will go through all the rows and all the columns. Now, before I do this, I'm going to make a string of text equal to nothing, a blank string of text. When I'm inside the loops here, I'm going to say text equals the same text plus a star. So I am attaching a star to the text. When one for loop is done, but I'm still inside the other for loop, I'm going to say text equals text plus, I'm going to put a strange character here. This character right here is what creates what's called a line break, or a break line right there. Okay? And then the reason I do all that is when both for loops are done, I can do a console dot, just like I did up here. I can write line, and I can put the text out. So before we go into triangle, let's see, like we did in the other one, if the rectangle works. So if I run this, I do R for rectangle, I'm going to size 12, and there's a 12 by 12 rectangle drawn on the screen right there. Okay? And then, just like in the other problem, it's just as easy to do triangle if you copy, say else if, paste in this code T for triangle, and you change the inner for loop, okay, to right here, say rows, okay, instead of size. And let's see if that works. So I'm going to say T for triangle, and I'm going to make it size 10, and there's a size 10 triangle right there. Same basic logic. Okay, so I'll slow down and take a look at that code for those of you doing the alternative assignments, and I'll put some comments in. So I get the shape choice from the user. So I say, do you want a rectangle or a triangle? I get the size from the user. So I ask them to enter a size. I then convert that line that I read into an integer. Okay. I have a variable to store the text to out for the shape. Since we're making the shape from a bunch of text, use a variable for that. Okay. I choose a rectangle first. So if I choose a rectangle, the same way I did it here with these two loops, okay? The same way I use two loops nested to draw circles, I'm doing the same thing here. I'm just a shape. I'm using a nested set of loops to draw a shape. I'm going to go through every row. I'm going to go through every column. I'm going to add a star to the shape. And then when one loop's finished, I'm going to add a line break. When you're typing and you hit enter, that's like a line, which is what that special character does. And then finally, I output the shape. So that's what all this code is doing. And then this else if right here would be, it's the same code for a triangle with the change in the second inner, which means nested for loop. So was right here I made that change to the inner for loop. But other than that, the code is the same. Okay. Let's see how that runs one more time. Run that. R for rectangle, size 50. There's a 50 by 50 rectangle. Let's run it again. T for triangle, size 5. There's a 5 by 5 triangle. Actually, it's 4. Okay, so what I actually need to do is change these to less than or equal to for this to actually reach that. I didn't realize that until this very moment. Let's do that again. T for triangle, 5, and there we go. Okay, everybody. Sorry about all that technical trouble at the beginning. Okay. But I'm going to wrap up there because I don't want to go longer. That's almost an hour of me lecturing at this point. And I know we only finished problem 3. So what I'll do is I'll make an adjustment to the schedule. So next week, I will finish looping problem 4, the rocket racing program, and then hopefully get a start right in on the programming extras. I will put the video that I've just recorded, I'm going to have to obviously splice together a couple videos to make it work, up on the website when I get a chance to do that. Okay? All right, guys, thanks for tuning in this week. Any last questions before I sign off for the week?
No,
Are we good?
thank you.
Thank you. Are we good to have like after meetings for like extra shows?
Yeah, let me just turn off the recording for 1 sec here.